Good morning, everyone. How are you guys feeling? Let's give it up again for Brian. What an awesome conversation. And I want to double click on something. Pablo and Justice, these guys need another big round of applause because it's an absolute joy to be here. Tom, welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much.
As Pablo and Justice mentioned, my name is Saif Ishouf. I live in Miami. I'm a proud Floridian, and I run a company called Lab 22C. We advise and we invest in the world's greatest founders, operators, and investors and institutions. And I couldn't be more excited to be up here at University of Florida with a legend like you, Tom.
I don't know about that.
No, definitely you are. And in this morning's fireside chat, we're going to get an opportunity to hear from Tom and really what has been a 40-plus year journey and what you've been able to build with Infotech. And I want to start with something, which is just to kind of do a little bit of a quick pulse check of everyone in the room. How many of you here in the room are founders? So we're with our tribe. And how many of you are students that you could describe yourself as founder curious? So that means all of us here. And Tom, you began a journey many years ago. You started actually as a faculty member. And I guess the starting point is, what was that aha moment that made you realize that you could transition the work that you've done in academic research into creating what could become a viable business?
Well, that's a good question. Is this on? Can you hear me okay? Yes. Good. It was really a contract we had with the Florida Attorney General's office, the antitrust unit, and it was back in 1981. They came to my partner and myself, who were working together on several consulting projects previously, and invited us to work a contract to investigate the possibility of price fixing and bid rigging in the highway construction market in the state of Florida. Now, how did we get invited to do that? It really goes back to 10 years previous for my dissertation, was the study of competition in sealed bid markets. In other words, can you look at data and analyze data, statistical analysis of data, and determine how competitive the market is? And I did a project with school milk, of all things, half pints of milk in schools that were sold for the Attorney General's office in the state of Missouri. And I collected all this data, analyzed it, did my dissertation, and the Attorney General forgot about what I was doing. And I took it back to him when I finished and said, here's the results of my dissertation. And didn't hear anything from him. 6 months later, I saw in the local paper that they had settled with 3 of the contractors that I had profiled as being non-competitive bidders. And so that attracted Florida. They were interested in looking at procurement in the state of Florida to see if they were getting good prices for public procurement activities. And so I did several consulting projects with the Attorney General's office. But this was just sort of a sidelight to my real job as a faculty member teaching economics. And it was really when I met Jim McClave, who became my partner, that we talked about starting a business. And all along, I've had sort of an entrepreneurial spirit, as I know all of you must, and I really wanted to start and run a business. My very first job out of college, I went to work for McDonnell Aircraft in St. Louis, and I learned computer programming. This was in the mid-'60s, and I wound up teaching computer programming as a sidelight to my faculty as I was teaching economics. In the evenings, I would teach students who wanted to learn computer programming. So I love that piece of it. But I realized after a year at working in McDonald's, I did not like the large corporate environment. It just didn't sit well with me. There was too much control. And the people that were sitting at their desks just seemed to do the same thing day after day and never get opportunities for growth. And so I quit that job, went back to graduate school, and then wound up being a professor and meeting Jim, and then this opportunity came along. And the reason that intrigued me was it really was the culmination of work that I'd been doing for almost 10 years in research. and I could apply it, to the state of Florida. But the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice, was investigating a number of states at that time for the possibility of overpricing of highway construction projects. And so I sort of knew that if we did this well in Florida, that there would be opportunity to do consulting in other states. So it was really that sparked me to say, okay, I guess I had confidence enough that if I left the university and teaching position, and who's going to give up a tenured faculty position for a startup? But I was willing to take that risk, and I figured if it didn't work out after 2 or 3 years, I could always go back to teaching or some other job.
Tom, there's so much that you brought out there, and we are in such a perfect setting to be able to explore this, being here at the University of Florida. And I want to double click on the energy of our young founder, who mentioned that he was up very, very late into the night, building, cranking. And there's a recent piece written by the founder of Y Combinator, Paul Graham. And if you haven't read the piece, definitely read it. And he talks about something which is called founder mode, which is much better than manager mode. And when you hear a leader like Tom talk about it, that's what founder mode looks like. 2 other big takeaways that I want to also highlight is it's easy for many of you who are here in the room that are students, maybe you're grad students working on what seems like a really random esoteric topic. But don't ever forget that there were 2 guys who were working in a trailer on the edge of Stanford campus that ultimately led to the creation of Google, Dr. Larry Page and Dr. Sergey Brin. They were nowhere near the core of the energy of what it would look like success could feel like. Oftentimes I say it's much more about the PhDs doing bench science research than in Miami we have Wynwood, than the hipsters in Wynwood. So you're absolutely in the right place. And the other thing that you mentioned, Tom, that I want to get to later is this idea of the greatest customer on planet Earth is called Uncle Sam. And there's no better customer that you could have. Uncle Sam is the largest customer and purchaser of everything on planet Earth, as are the Little Sams, which are local and state governments. How did you turn Gainesville into a launch pad for infotech? What was it that made it both a challenging place to do it, and what was it that made it such an awesome place for you to get there?
Well, first of all, I think UF has great resources, and I was from Wisconsin. I came down as a visiting professor here a couple of times and worked at UF, got to know people here, and my partner was a faculty member here for 10 years in the statistics department. And so the resources that UF provides faculty members and people were great and real help, particularly the computer resources. They had great computer facilities, and we had access to that as we got started. This was back in the mainframe days. It's not like your iPads, iPhones, and laptops that you have today that could do so much more than the biggest computer could, back in the time we were working with this in the late 70s and early 80s. The second thing that made Gainesville great was we were one of the few tech companies, in fact, maybe the only tech company hiring at that time. Shands at UF was also, hiring technical resources, but the access to students who loved Gainesville, wanted to go to football games, loved being around here, and didn't want to leave when they graduated. We were able to attract some very good students. In fact, many of them still are working today and have worked their whole career and retired, from infotech, which gives me a great sense of pride. So I think just the resources that were here helped us get started, and it was sort of an out-of-the-way place where you could just put heads down and work and not be distracted by a lot of other things as well. We did consider, do we need to move? Because the challenge is, as we continue to grow, we need more senior people, senior developers, people who had maybe 10, 15 years experience could come in and be leaders. And those were very hard to find in Gainesville. In fact, there weren't any. And so we had to recruit from outside of Gainesville, and that was hard. Because who wants to move to Gainesville if you're in a tech center like Silicon Valley or Atlanta, Orlando, places like that. So it was hard to recruit people. So that was the one big challenge. The second big challenge was our customer base was really departments of transportation. It turned out to be departments of transportation throughout the entire country. And so in my career, I'm not necessarily proud to say it, but I'm a 2 million miler. with Delta, because I've visited every single state department of transportation in the country, including Hawaii and Alaska. You know, talking to customers, you know, I loved what Brian was saying, you know, you've got to get in front of your customer, talk to them, know your customer's business. That was key to success. And, you know, I put myself right on the front line there, traveling around. We didn't have Zoom, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have email, none of that stuff back in the early 80s. So it was just face-to-face, getting out there and meeting people, attending meetings, giving presentations, doing all of those things to help bootstrap the company.
Something that shines through in your journey, and we heard it from Brian, is that customer obsession, and also something else which I think everyone here in the room can consider, which is that you're here at the University of Florida, you're in Gainesville, you're faculty, you're a student, you're a founder, you're an entrepreneur, an investor. You also happen to be at a moment where the pandemic ushered in the decentralization of American innovation. Innovation happens not just in Silicon Valley and in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but it happens everywhere. And also, you're part of a bigger ecosystem, which sometimes in our little pockets around the state we forget about. We're in a G20 economy that's called Florida, which means that we are amongst the 20 largest economies on planet Earth. And so you might be able to develop your science and your intellectual property here in Gainesville, and then you might be able to tap into resources like what's happening in Palm Beach at FPL's 35 Mules. You might be able to access angel investment networks. You might be able to go to a tech conference like Emerge Americas in Miami. There's so much that's happening within our state. Tom, what I loved is that you got really, really close and proximate with your customer, and you got customer obsessed. Tell us about that journey of getting your first customer, because that's always the hardest thing on the roadmap of every entrepreneur.
Well, really, back at the beginning, we were consultants with the state of Florida. Our first customer for what we developed turned out to be the Kansas Department of Transportation. And it was the chief legal counsel at KDOT that heard about what we had done in Florida, heard about the $30 million that the state of Florida recovered based on our analysis, without even going to trial. They were able to show what the lack of competition was, what contractors were actually doing to collude with each other, and the contractors settled. Kansas felt they had a problem, and they were about to be investigated by the Department of Justice. So they came to us, and they asked for something different. They said, we don't want to hire you as consultants. What we would like to do is take the tools that you've developed and have you provide those tools to us in a software package that we could run on an ongoing basis to monitor and look at what we're doing. And that was sort of the aha moment, because up to that time, Jim and I were just thought of ourselves as consultants. But I love computer programming, as you may have gathered from what I said earlier. And so I just jumped on the opportunity. I said, sure. Jim wasn't quite so sure, but I said, yes, we can do this. They asked us if we could build, and the interesting thing, they said, and we'd like to have it in 6 months. So this was, I first talked to them in May of 1982. In June of 1982, we had written a contract with them, and they expected delivery by the end of December. Well, I spent between Christmas and New Year's, and through New Year's, in KDOT, installing the software that we had worked incredibly hard, and talked about 70-hour, 80-hour weeks, whatever it took. We did, and there was a handful of us that wrote the system at the time and delivered. And we did deliver that project on time, and it was pretty amazing accomplishment, really. But that was our first customer, and once we started working with them, other states approached us and were interested in the software. And so we began rolling out that software to several states. And the other interesting thing that really led is you go down a trail in working with the customer. You look at what they need and how they're using what you have. And it turns out to do the analysis, you've got to collect data from a lot of different sources within the agency. All the bidding data, all the vendor information data, the subcontracts that the contractors have, the materials that are being used in the project. There's just a ton of data that you gather. At this point in time, there were no systems to manage that data. The data was, a lot of it was hand managed. Spreadsheets were just starting to come into play, and so there was a lot of work to be done. And so we identified the opportunity to help build the applications that would manage all of this data. Not just analyze it, but actually manage the construction project. And today the software suite is from planning through completion of construction. It manages all the data. What we don't do is design or asset management, which are the two ends of the process. But we're working with companies that do that.
So, Tom, unbelievably impressive. I want to share that if it was a tweet, what we would say, the TLDR is that Tom is OG founder mode. That idea of turning around a project that quickly, moving at the speed of customer excellence, that's extraordinary. And I think that a lot of us who are sitting here, how many of you in here are non-technical founders? You are not programmers. Don't be shy. Raise your hands, okay? Tom said something, there's no shame in the game. There's no shame in the game. Tom said something about data, and he said something about his passion around computer programming, even though he's an economist. So we're also in this really unique window of time where every single one of us, if you're a non-technical founder, raise your hand again. Or if you're not, raise it, it's okay. I studied non-Western history and diplomacy, which my kids have no idea what the heck that means, right? We're in a moment right now where each one of us has an opportunity to access the power of what could be the equivalent of 10,000 Indian programmers sitting in Bangalore. I can say that because I'm Indian. Because there are tools, I can say it. Anybody else said that, we'd have to cancel them. I can say it. But you can harness tools like Replit and Cursor, Applied Intuition, to be able to have the power of 10,000 programmers sitting in Bangalore. But what a leader like Tom also showed you is you have to be data obsessed. You have to get into every single situation being, having, in the military, they talk about total informational dominance, right? America, we believe that we are going to be the space superpower. There's us, and then there's really no one else. But in businesses, that's also essentially what it requires. You've seen a lot over the last 40 years. Tom, you've probably forgotten more about what it's really like in the journey than most of us will ever hope to experience. And what were some of those seismic shifts that have happened in the journey that over the last 40 years that made you say, oh boy, here we go again. Like what we thought was true has completely changed. The cheese has moved yet again. What have been some of those moments like for you?
Well, first of all, I feel very fortunate to have lived in the time period that I've lived. From seeing the very beginning of computers being used in business and government in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, and seeing it evolve from the mainframes to the PC environment, all disconnected, all isolated, and standalone type environments. And then, to me, the biggest seismic shift was the internet. In other words, the ability to have connectivity, to be able to connect all of these systems together. And today, we take for granted. I mean, what we're growing up with today is so different, the world we live in, where computing power is just everywhere. It's in the cloud. You can access it from any point on the earth. First time I traveled to Europe, I was disconnected from all communications, for a while. This is back in the early 90s. Now you go over there, your phone just recognizes where you are, and you can talk just like you were here. So the whole shift from, and for the applications we were developing, we started on the mainframe, then we had to migrate to client server, which is PCs and server based, and then finally to the internet, the web, where we live today. And today we're hosting the applications for our customers in the Amazon web environment, which is an incredible place. So just being able to adjust. And one of the people, one of my customers said to me, and this was in the late 90s when I was first telling them about the internet and how we could use that to help their business. He said, Tom, he said, what's next? He said, everything seems to be always changing. And I think that's the world we live in today. You've got to be ready because it's constantly changing. And it's changing at a faster pace than it did back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. The pace of change today is phenomenal, and it's just hard to keep up with. But you can't be afraid of it. And so many of our customers were just slow to it. In fact, construction, period. I'm talking about horizontal infrastructure construction, not building construction so much. It's very slow to change because of a lot of liability issues, but they're very slow to change, and it's been just a hard sell to move them to newer and newer technologies as they come. But it's been an exciting time and a fun journey, and I wouldn't have wanted to miss it.
Something that I love about what you said is this idea of curiosity, and I think there's also something very special about learning in community, just like what Justice and Pablo have created here. I have a cheesy tagline where I say community is currency, and community shows up in a lot of different ways. In the founder journey, we can feel very, very much alone. It's very hard to feel like you're connected to something much bigger. I'm in my innovation ecosystem here in Florida. A lot of people know me through LinkedIn. By the way, if you don't follow me, please add me. I answer every single message, put the rocket ship in the emoji. And for me, it's because I'm infinitely curious, and you did that in your journey. You didn't have an idea that, okay, I was set around green screen terminals and what programming looked like 40 years ago, and didn't iterate to the world of now cloud and generative AI. I believe wholeheartedly in that idea of community as being currency. You and Dr. McClave, you guys must have had to play a little bit of good cop, bad cop. Give us one final good cop, bad cop story in your journey, and then also give us one little Easter egg for what advice you would give to a new grad if they wanted to crack into the entrepreneurial journey.
Well, unfortunately, I can only give you good cop. Jim and I have had an amazing relationship. In fact, no one can really believe that we've been in business with each other for 40 years and never had a major disagreement. Part of that is at the beginning I told you, that I was really interested in software and taking everything I knew in economics and analysis and applying it and delivering it to someone so they could use it themselves. Jim, on the other hand, was an old football player. He loves the combativeness of courtrooms, being in front of juries and testifying, and he's done phenomenally well. So basically, we divided the business into two business units: our consulting unit and our software development unit. And he ran the consulting, I ran the system software. I had one bad experience testifying, and I said, I just don't want to do that again. And he said, I love it, I'll take it over. So, and in fact, I'll tell you a little story about consulting, is he has got one of the most successful consulting practices in the country in the antitrust field. He's already recovered. His analyses have enabled plaintiffs to recover well over $1 billion. In fact, one settlement was $700 million of overpricing that was occurring in an industry. So, I mean, he's done phenomenal work, and we work together. We meet on a regular basis. Any major decision the company makes, we jointly agree to, and but then we let each other do our own thing. So we haven't had a lot of bad cop experiences. I would say, just be curious about what's out there. There's plenty of opportunity. There's always opportunity, and I think just be curious, be energetic, be willing to accept risk. I've got a lot of employees that are risk adverse. They don't like change. Any type of change is going to cause them heartburn and sleepless nights. And you can't be an entrepreneur if that's how you live. You have to really be willing to accept risk, accept failure. Failure is going to happen. We've had projects, I would say this, in all the projects, we've never not completed a project. We've had some projects that it's cost us a lot to finish because we made critical mistakes. But in any event, you are going to make mistakes, you are going to have failures. Be resilient, and just get out there, be willing to put yourself out there. If you're not willing to take that risk, you're not going to make it.
Tom, I'm going to give you the two words entrepreneurs don't often get. Thank you. Thank you for what you've been able to do, what you've been able to build, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insight, and thank you for what you've done for entrepreneurship, not only in our state, but right here in Gainesville with what you've built with Infotech. Thank you.
You're welcome.